I'm Shirley Paulson, and I invite you into one of the many conversations I've had with Arthur Dewey, the West Star editor of my book, Illuminating the Secret Revelation of John, Catching the Light. The questions that come up from reading both this ancient text and my book about it are both broad and deep. So we turn the spotlight on one of these many thought-provoking topics. Being saved, I think the way I learned it in religious education is that being saved has something to do with after you die, then if you're good or bad, then you determines whether you're really saved or not. And so there are two things that has to do with your morals, but also death. Like the big decision comes about when you've already died. But I think what I was intrigued with in this book was that there didn't seem to be a discussion about death. It had to do with here and now, like you're saying, save me.
Yeah.
And save me from this anguish. And it's not just after I'm dead I want to be saved. I want to be saved now, which is why I think healing is so important, because it's a now thing. But I also think, for me, when I was thinking about why there's this sort of bridge over life and death that almost didn't even exist, it made me think about death in a different way. That death is not really the defining factor in being saved or even being alive. It has so little to do with anything. The knowledge of being of who you are is more important than it is the condition of your body. That was kind of remarkable for me.
It is. Well, if you want to throw into this, near-death experiences,
Right.
the people who, as it were, come back from these experiences, one of the things you see is that the point of death is just that. There's much more involved, and it's sometimes rather interesting how we focus on death, that final moment. And I remember there was a Jesuit, William Lynch, in his book Images of Hope, said that we focus so much on that we overlook the fact that we're too weak to be courageous. We're too, this is the final moment. This is where you breathe your last. And he was somewhat humorous about that we build it up and you just go. But there's even more to that, especially when we talk about these various experiences that are now being recorded more and more, that there's more to come.
So you're getting onto the subject of soul then, because I think that's one of the main themes again in the book, is that soul is important, but it's also not defined by death. I loved it when you talked to me about the butterfly. Could you tell us about that? When you shared that with me, I thought that was so important to include it in the book.
Well, the notion of the butterfly, in the Greek, it's suke, which is, it can mean soul, it can mean butterfly. You may say, well, what does that mean? Well, what the butterfly is a wonderful illustration of transformation. The butterfly changes. There's three different moments. It's a grub, and then it gets into this case. And, there's been studies on that everything is mished and mashed when it's in the case. You don't have this little guy in there and he's transforming a little bit in. No, the whole thing sort of liquefies. How in the world do you get a butterfly out of that? I have no idea. But what seems to be the case is that the form or the shape or whatever you want to call it somehow carries through and becomes the butterfly. And so that the observation is that this thing changes shape. And whenever something changes shape in the ancient world, it's changing a body. And indeed, the butterfly has three different bodies. And people have used that as a metaphor for what could happen to us. What could we be? And that's a rather interesting thing. When you think of Psyche, then, as that part of you which has choices, and it's the choice which helps generate the transformation.
That's the powerful part of the story, I think, is the fact that there's always a choice, that what this author is doing is saying, here is the choice, here's how you can make choices, and that you can find that your life is not confined to your senses or to the body, because that's what the demons would tell you. But the fact is that your identity is intact. And it reminds me too of the way the whole book begins with John, who is mourning over the death of Jesus, and yet Jesus appears to him, who looks like an old man and a child, and I forget what else, but there are sort of three different ways of him perceiving the presence of who he was. Even though he didn't see the same being, he saw him in his own way of understanding. So this is a helpful. This whole idea of transformation is helpful for us to understand the depth and meaning of soul that's beyond what our physical senses tell us.
Yeah, I think one of the problems that I have with the notion of soul is that we take it as an object.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, that's one thing soul isn't. Soul is not an object. I think this is one of the things we have to really reflect on, because the soul, suke, is at the locus of choice. And that is, you might say, at the very center of subjectivity. So that you're making choices, and indeed you're making soul. This is, we are soul makers, and that's it. But that actually reflects the notion that we reflect, as images of God, we reflect the God. And what is this God? The God is a creator. So what the soul is doing is, in fact, indulging or engaging in the co-creation that God gives you, empowers you to create.
Yeah. And that brings us right back to reflection again, is that you're not really a God, but you are participating in the creating. You're participating in the reflection. You're participating in the action of being useful. Thanks for joining us and thinking about one of these deeper questions with us as we turned the spotlight on one of the many challenging topics associated with this ancient text. If you haven't read my book yet, Illuminating, the Secret Revelation of John, Catching Delight, it's published by Cascade Books and is available from your favorite bookstore or from the website at earlychristiantexts.com/book. And be sure to let me know if you'd like to hear a conversation on some other questions. You can also leave your questions on the website. Again, that's earlychristiantexts.com.